Hey folks, and welcome to a Daily Rating Special. This week we'll sit down with Vincent Daly to get his thoughts on what he believes are the essential films in the zombie movie genre. And don't worry, there's no spoilers. Vince will give a brief review of the movie, share some thoughts, and of course, then rate the films. The daily ratings are always fair, honest, and most importantly, they're consistent. On today's show, Vince will be rating and reviewing Night of the Living Dead, directed by George A. Romero, Dawn of the Dead, the 1978 version by George A. Romero, The Return of the Living Dead by Dan O'Bannon, 28 Days Later by Danny Boyle, and Shaun of the Dead, directed by Edgar Wright. So stay tuned and enjoy the show. Mr. Vincent Daly, how we doing, buddy?
Tell me, boy, how's it going?
I think it's going pretty well. I'm excited for today's special, that's for sure.
I know, yeah. It's been cooking in the books for some time, so I'm happy to finally hit the folks at home with this one.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, I think I love the genre kind of. I love how you kind of just explored the whole zombie movies, and then basically you're saying like, hey, here's kind of an essential guide.
Yeah.
Here's what and that like you went through the years of kind of when zombie movies have like originated kind of. Mm-hmm. I love it. I think it's going to be a really good time. Definitely good homework you did for us.
Absolutely. I'm excited to try to help navigate that a little bit because there's just such an overwhelming amount of zombie films, and I think especially for the spooky month that we're releasing this special for, it was exciting to take a look at because zombies are unique to film. You know, you look at like a Frankenstein, vampires, any kind of spooky monster category. They were born in books. Zombies were born on film, and it was just great to have a deep dive into.
And how deep did you go as far as like researching and like the essential films, or you have so many zombie movies? Well, so many zombie movies. Then you have the ones that are rated really high already, or at least other, you know what I mean, would have been kind of critically reviewed. But as far as like zombies go, how far back in the culture did you go? And just like when was zombie used for the first time in film? Like, how did you go all the way that kind of?
Yeah, I was trying to have a deep dive into what was the first zombie film. That's what this project started off of. Definitely evolved a little bit while watching to be a couple things. I think for folks at home, my objectives going into this are what makes a zombie a zombie? What is the progression of zombies on screen? What are the tropes of a zombie film that makes a zombie film?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of, rage virus and different type of things out there that may not encapsulate what zombies are about. And more than anything, navigating the huge, and I mean huge amount of crappy zombie films out there.
Yeah, you have classic, like kind of horror, spooky, like Halloween, just October movies, and then you have this subgenre of zombie movies, which is on its own massive.
Absolutely. Navigating that and what's worth your time, that's what it really snapped back to, but it definitely started as a project to say, what was the first zombie film? There was some stuff in the 30s, I believe. There was obviously some international stuff. There is voodoo kind of ritual roots to what maybe looks like a zombie on screen, but plainly I can say, especially after a lot of research and a lot of watching, this movie progression that, once again, fabulously gone through in the beginning.
I'll take it. I just don't think so.
I think you rattle them off. It's good. It's great.
No, I read a list that's in front of me. I turn on the mics, make sure they're working, and then I read a list, and then you do all the magic.
Right. But going through that, navigating these zombie films, and I think, again, to the type of the type of projects I like to get curious with films is that what is worth your time, what is worth my time a little bit as well. But what can we see through the progression of zombies on screen? How do the tropes evolve? And more importantly, what do the filmmakers do with those tropes to create fresh ideas and fresh movie experiences? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
There we go.
And I think let's get started with what we were talking about. Not the first zombie movie, but damn close to it, and things that really genre-starting, trend-setting, things like that, groundbreaking. It takes us back to 1968. It doesn't even have a rating. It's not even rated as far as R or anything like that.
You're right.
Hour and 36 minutes. It's Night of the Living Dead, directed by George A. Romero.
Night of the Living Dead, it is going to be the first time that we see what... And it was important for me to tap into this because if I'm going to set what the objective of this type of watch list is about, it's making sure that you can see the first time that we actually see zombies as we know them on film and the tropes of zombie films as we know them. Luckily, it does really start with George Romero and John Russo on this film.
Yeah, John Russo is another key factor in this, right?
Exactly.
Not directing, but writing right there with Romero.
That is the film duo, and very important to dive into because as we go into the bulkhead of many zombie films to come in the decades to come, it is going to be a lot to unpack and find out what zombie movies are worth your time. I think the split of this core team illustrates a little bit of a story that I'll go into once we get into the 80s, but important to know that this is the source, and I'm happy to say that Night of the Living Dead is iconic because all of the pieces are there. All of the ingredients in the soup of what makes a zombie film are there. Very typical. Our characters are not really sure how the outbreak happens. I think the mystery of the outbreak is always key to the zombie film. And the vast majority of the film is getting caught in a place, survival themes, barricading, maybe getting filled in by a radio television premise, and fighting off the hordes of the living dead. It is all right here in Night of the Living Dead, and maybe a little bit a little bit early on. I'll touch on a moment of the zombies themselves aren't maybe the most menacing.
Okay.
But it was awesome to see in 68, in black and white, the start of what will be almost every zombie film in its DNA.
Oh, talk about trend setting.
Absolutely. It is all right here, plain and simple. Let's touch on the soundtrack a little bit because I think it is probably the outlier when looking at zombie films as a tense horror. The soundtracks will evolve, obviously, for some of the 70s, 80s. It's very synthy and spooky, but this has a very Bernard Herrmann feel, a very Hitchcock, almost the sci-fi type of horror or creature feature movies that we get in the 50s and earlier 60s. That is the type of feel here that it's these are freaks of nature. And that presentation, I think, goes a long way to give the film some charm and make up for some of the areas where it does. I mean, if we're going to be calling this a horror movie, it does lack some scares because of its age. You know, these zombies are walking on screen. They're not necessarily gory. We do get some nude zombies on screen, which is interesting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Maybe not fully nude. I think we see some breasts.
But that's interesting. Maybe that's why it wasn't rated. Maybe this would have been back in the day in 68, this must have been a very
sure
interesting film to come out. This might have been a movie that, like, you don't tell people you went and saw.
You're right.
You know,
a little too campy, a little bit too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel just because you have an older movie doesn't mean you can't have through and through spooky or vibe. You know, you look at like some of Hitchcock stuff,
absolutely,
and that represents. But this trying to find what it is some of those musical scores and what the zombies look like and everything like that doesn't quite it's taking you in and out of like a genre or a horror genre kind of. Would you say so? Or like
I think so. I think it makes up. Why I wanted to note the soundtrack is because it's very iconic when you hear it. It's like woo.
Oh, okay.
You know?
Right.
But it does a good bit to sell a black and white horror film that by today's standards is really not scary, and maybe by 68 standards was pretty horrifying. But again, a almost a constant feature that I think will come up in my criticism of older film. There is no point in watching this thinking you're in the theaters back in the day. We are watching this in the here and now.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think that's some of the palatability of watching an older film. It helps the soundtrack, that is. So,
okay.
When it comes to a lot of what the zombies are about, I mean, again, right in my objectives for this specials, folks, we're talking about the zombies themselves. There is the establishment of fear of fire. Gotta chop them in the head or destroy the brain in some sort of way. I don't believe they call them zombies by name just yet. It is the living dead. And we'll actually play into some of the legal battles we see later on in the 80s, which I'm very excited to detail and dive into. But for the most part, this one's pretty easy to find because, yes, there are zombies in earlier films of that they are voodoo possessed and they are transfixed by a spell. And I'm not even saying that is ruled out entirely here for how the zombie outbreak happens. I think what this film does so great, or at least one of the two main things that this film does so great, is that the mystery of what the hell is going on is really suspenseful because you don't know why these zombies are starting. You don't know what the affliction is immediately. And there's a very real problem solving that happens as a story plot line to say, how are we surviving?
That's so interesting. You watch a zombie movie now, we all know what zombies are.
Exactly.
And we all know, like, the I don't know, the fun campiness of, like, how to kill a zombie. And there's, like, zombie survival books and everything like that. But it's interesting back then, you have the characters naturally figuring out how to deal with zombies and stuff, which still happens in movies today. But literally, while writing this, it's probably just like, okay, we have these people, we have these weird, literally the subtitle of this is They Won't Stay Dead.
Right.
So it's like, it's almost like the
that.
writers and as audience almost, it's like, what do you do? Like, how would you do this? And then the people in the movie are also doing that.
Yep.
Very fun, very
It's
cool.
the introduction of a creature, and I don't think we as a viewing audience have an opportunity to see the origins of such an iconic creature and know what it's about, and then see for the first time it being presented on film and unpacked on film.
Yes.
And so it really was worth your time to see those origins where you could say, again, to my point, the zombies are really not menacing at all. Even when they're up in your face and trying to claw at the characters on screen, you're like, all right, it's not scary in that way, but it's fascinating to watch them unpack the horror of, wait, they don't die? We have to now board up the windows? It's very interesting.
As far as, so it's 68, how was, like, gore? I mean, gore's starting to become a little bit more in films. You have, like, Vietnam War era stuff coming out a little bit, like, and gore definitely with movies is changing. Was it super gory? Was it because it's black and white? They just went for feel and emotion more?
I think, I don't know if the black and white was a choice of maybe trying to make the gore pop out a little bit more. I think the gore definitely takes a back seat. Luckily, by 10 years later, when Romero revisits this idea with Dawn of the Dead, that is cranked up to what you would expect out of a zombie film, with disembowelments and yada yada, right. Stuff. So it is tame on that level as well.
Yeah.
And again, I think that criticism does have to come at it in the sense that zombie films are horror films. We obviously see later on in the genre or in the topic of this, the subject matter of zombies, comedy more and more being interwoven into the films. But
I think it's also just the sheer number of zombie material too, especially when you hit 2000s. It's just like, well, we can go. You know what I mean?
We can go.
There is serious, but then it's comedy.
Absolutely.
The interesting, because if you look at our list, really, it stops in. Or it doesn't quite even hit the 2010s, and it's interesting. That's when, like, maybe some TV takes over. Actually, where you have
Walking Dead and
right,
yada, yada.
Exactly, yeah,
absolutely. Some other highlights of this film are the characters themselves. You do have the slight beginnings of the trope that is almost in every zombie film as far as modern day is considered, that man is the real threat, man is the real enemy here, and man's intentions. There's some of that here. Mostly, though, it's squashed in a very good way that the characters on screen are so competent. It was refreshing to watch effective problem solving in a horror film, especially after watching so many bad horror films as of late. Dwayne Jones, the actor, actually won historically as well. This film is one of the first films that has a male black lead as the main character. Ben is his character, and man, he's got this situation on lockdown. He is just handling everything so effectively, and it's really a delight to see on film because it's like, wow, I mean, not that he knows what to do with zombies, but he's like, yeah, we got to board up the windows. We got to make sure we have escape routes. We have, we got to listen to the radio.
We talked about this before. Competent people, watching competent people in movies, that's like what you want.
It's enjoyable.
That's like, it's what makes Han Solo so great. Mm-hmm. Like old Han Solo, rather than what they've done to new Han Solo. It's like you want competent. You want competent people. Again, there's like a realism to it. It's like, okay, we're in this situation. You're either going to get like mass hysteria because people are freaking out because of zombies, and then you're going to have like true problem solvers trying to get to the bottom of this. What can we do to stay alive?
It's an immersive factor because I think a lot of the joy, and again, if we're going to be talking about the early tropes of survival and kind of what an audience member would do if they were in that shoes, it's enjoyable watching someone effectively do that, because if you don't have that as an audience member, you're like, wow, they're really, I'm invested in the character. And more importantly, if you do think of movies like that, and especially zombie films, it doesn't take you out of it. I think
keeps you engaged.
Exactly.
Because it can go either way. It's either taking you out, which is really rooting, or it's just like it's grabbing you even more.
Yeah, we talked about the first Evil Dead fairly recently, and it was, I can't tell you how much I was taken out of that film, because it was like, these characters are buffoons. These are idiotic characters.
Yeah, it's not like,
Yeah, and it's not engaging. Certainly that was more so comedy vibes, and maybe the butt of the joke is that, but it was great to see, because I think the engagement that we see if survival is going to be a theme, and more importantly, again, if we're setting up these tropes, these themes, these motifs in these movies, you got to know how it's done right and how it looks when it's being done right, to draw a contrast of when it's going wrong, it's really going wrong. You have some of that. There's some good scares, believe it or not, in this film. Most of that is through tension. Most of that is through our group of characters kind of degrading and their sanity degrading, which once again, the first time we're seeing that kind of being put in place. The endless hordes of the dead are almost a man versus nature type of conflict, that we're trapped in a confined space, and we have to figure out how to live and how to survive. I think it was great to see that the horror was understood in that movie, in Night of the Living Dead, especially so early for 1968, that it is about what's going on in the living people's minds, the fear that happens to them, and that's really going to sell the fear versus a jump scare or some gore on screen. It's there in the DNA, which again is huge and incredible to see. Again, the starting ground of what we know almost 100% what zombies are about. We know everything about it. It's exciting to see it start. Also, the unraveling of the threat, I think, is where this movie, if I have to really get it down to a bottom line, why is watching such an old film worth your time? I think unraveling the threat, they understood exactly what they needed to do, and almost every zombie film it does it since. It is experiencing the threat, it is bunkering down and having that survival element, and then it's getting info dumps outside of where the threat is, through radio or TV. For A Night of the Living Dead, because it's a little bit earlier, it was exclusively radio. But it was so fascinating to see that the description of how to deal with the dead and what our characters should be doing, and that fueling ideas.
Right, you said it like the DNA, and that's like the DNA of this film is totally through the coming zombie movies over the next how many decades.
Absolutely.
It's almost, I don't want to say refreshing, but I think that's incredible because you could have had such horrible zombie movies for almost for the first decade, and we would almost all be like, oh, that's understandable. We're trying to understand the genre, getting into it. But like right off the bat, it's hitting these marks.
Absolutely.
And setting the trend kind of very cool. Very, very cool.
And that's why I was so positive on it, because, again, I can't stress enough if there's almost like a practical indicator to say, like, whoa, if the zombies aren't scary, then what's the point of the zombie film? There is really good here to watch as a modern day.
There's emotion in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And fascinating to watch it all start with that. And I think that really boils down to a lot of factors that create a baseline of what is a zombie film, what are zombies, and what do characters do under that very specific kind of man versus, natural force conflict. And the fact that something so early, if not the very first, defining the genre, it's there, that's very exciting for me to watch. I think when it comes down to a lot of what is done to build scares and build tension, again, just relating real quick back to the radio and the info dumps, you could even say that's maybe even a little bit sloppy writing to have something so like jammed down the audience's throat. But it's great because we've watched the whole film, them trying to stumble through a situation. Those info dumps are almost catch up for the whole film. And maybe, again, going to a point that if you did not know what a zombie was about, we need to make sure you're introduced to what the stakes are here and what the threat is, especially if that threat's not very real with an unmenacing looking zombie. I think the film does a good job at covering that and becoming a little bit more timeless, instead of just visually saying the zombies are a threat. We need to be scared of them. Well, they're not really scary in this. How do we communicate that fear elsewhere? It is through those information dumps.
I love it.
Yeah, I think other than that, I mean, I can praise the competent characters until the cow comes home. I mean, really, that is a positive note. But other than that, Night of the Living Dead, I think hits for me as very much a should watch. I don't think it crosses over into a must watch because, again, I think bottom line, with the passage of time, there are going to be better iterations of what's going on here. That said, it was a phenomenal watch to see the origin of it, and exciting for that reason as well. With that said, though, we will go ahead and give The Night of the Living Dead a 78.
Oh, 78 is really good. I mean, for the first true movie in the genre to hit that 78, that's huge. And I like that you got it to 78. Like, it isn't a must-watch as far as just a singular film is involved. But, I mean, I bet you would recommend to almost every audience that you actually should watch it if you're about kind of the horror genre. Because
totally.
it is like... It's so crucial just in the history of all of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow, very good. 78 is a very good score for such an old first film.
Yes, a very campy horror film.
I wasn't expecting that. I really wasn't.
Yeah. And I wasn't either. Watching it was just more so...
It's been a joy.
I felt it was necessary for the project of what this is about, what this special is about, to say, well, if I'm really going to be calling heads or tails on whether a film does a good job with zombies, I better know the origin of it. It was amazing to watch this whole film unfold and say, wow, this actually wrote the book on what that criteria is.
Wow.
So
that's really good. That's awesome to hear. And so our next one, like you said, we're 10 years later, and same director, George A. Romero, and he comes back to the genre with what a name that everybody knows, Dawn of the Dead. A lot of people know it for the 2004 version, but this is 1978 we're in here. Much longer as well. How does he return to it? What do we get?
It's interesting. So we have a 10-year gap here in between Night of the Living Dead 68 and Dawn of the Dead 78. There's obviously a lot of iterations of what a zombie is. Specifically, I believe there's a lot of Italian films that touch into zombies.
Wow.
A lot of Italian horror was flourishing at that time, early 70s, late 60s. So a lot of interpretations happened there. It is amazing to see Romero come back and be like, yeah, I wrote this. This is mine. So,
very cool.
Refreshing to see, because it's like, there's some weird aspects to Dawn of the Dead. Essentially, we have a 30-minute introduction of our characters, almost very a la Billy Friedkin's style of how he makes movies. Reminded me of The Exorcist, reminded me of Sorcerer, in the introduction of our ensemble cast in many different spots. And then we finally get into it. And if you don't know anything about this movie, this is what took the idea of being trapped in a place and having to board up the windows and survive. And that theme of survival is taken to a very visually fun representation because they are trapped in a mall. And this is where that mall zombie comes into play. The evolution of the zombies really isn't much. The zombies are still very much Walking Dead. They are not fast. They are not smart. They still fear fire. You know, these tropes are still here. And Romero returning to this was so interesting because, honestly, I haven't watched a huge amount of his films, but you could definitely tell he was walking around a mall one day and he said, wouldn't it be great to be held up in here and say, oh wait, I invented zombies, you know, I can revisit this premise. Very fresh, very exciting.
Do you think it was very much so, okay, we're 10 years back, this is my genre I created. Did it feel like, let's step up everything, we're no longer in a house, let's make, you know, where we're stuck a bigger, let's make the zombies more, let's make them a little bit more gruesome? Like, do you think everything was just about stepping it up?
I don't know, not in like a blockbuster way. I think, and I obviously don't know, I mean, I haven't dived into the real behind the scenes.
Right, we're just looking at it for what it is.
It's more so, it feels like there is true inspiration to the idea that you can do something new with the concept of zombies in a new setting and have it really evolve the movie.
The DNA is there.
Yep.
But we're evolving.
Exactly. Yeah. I would say I want to little bit more focus on the first 30 minutes because I think it's the roughest part of the film, and it's rough for a few reasons. The script is, I would say, probably at its worst. There's some out of left field stuff. What we're doing is we're coming into this where the world's really kind of going to shit and everyone is panicking. That's how they land. Our characters land in the mall to find an escape and find a place that they can bunker down. The script is a little bit out there for that reason, and it's a little bit, I don't know, brutal, I guess, would be the word I want to say. It's important to note, though, because though it does introduce our ensemble cast, our squad, basically.
Yep.
And once again, a theme, a motif of zombie films is the squad of who you're bunkering down with. Maybe all walks of life, maybe people that you would normally not band together with. You know, you're pushed together because of the survival.
Yes.
So it does a good job at that because they do really come from opposite ends of everything. The script is just, man, it's that first 30 minutes almost constantly, I was just saying, what? Which I don't know if it's because Romero is now alone without John Russo.
Right.
Once again,
But why only in the first half an hour? You know what I mean? It's like what happened there?
It's before we get to the mall. It's before we have a real confrontation with zombies, and I think it definitely highlights it because once they get to the mall, that movie's magic. So, it really hits in such a good way.
So it's almost like George A. Romero is just like he is just so good when it comes to sheltered zombie movie.
Yeah,
and anything else he struggles with.
Get him behind wood boards and nails, he's golden. You know.
Interesting.
Yeah, but that really goes into my next point with get us in the mall. It is so great. It was amazing to watch, especially in modern day, because I feel like the mall is such a overplayed zombie thing. You know, it is.
Well, it is now to us.
Exactly. You know, there's obviously the analogy of mindless shoppers, and there's almost like a social commentary there of them being trapped in the mall.
Yep.
As far as the evolution of zombies, again, what is in the DNA of the monster that we're studying here, folks? It is. You know, you have an introduction that these zombies are coming back to a routine when they're not feeding on brains. They're falling back into maybe some semblance of who they are, and that creates a tiny bit of drama and a little bit of a spin. You know, there is an evolution there. It's not just the same exact zombies. The zombies are a lot more brutal now, which is great.
Yeah, it's interesting, like the gore is stepped up and everything like that as well, correct? Which brings me back to the first one, Night of the Living Dead, because it's like you didn't need them to be, now that we have decades of zombie movies, putting yourself back then, you don't need extra added scare or creepiness to gore because the audience alone has never seen something like this.
Sure.
So the audience is just like, oh my gosh, wait, they're not dying? You can't kill them? So seeing another human come up, another human that doesn't have a lot of makeup or anything like that, it's already so scary.
Right.
And him almost recognizing that, it's like, okay, well, if we had 10 years of other people making movies, like here we are now, like next iteration, Romero comes back in and says, okay, how do I get that same fear factor from those people? Okay, let's dress them up a little bit more.
Absolutely. Dress them up a little bit more, amp up the volume. Of course, we have much more of a horde than was Night of the Living Dead. There's a good head count in Night of the Living Dead, believe it or not.
Right, but this just because you have the space of them all as well.
Exactly.
The numbers are way up, yeah.
Exactly.
Any returning, real quick, any returning cast?
No, but once again, the African-American lead is the best, most effective person. I forget the actor's name.
Oh, okay.
But he is so effective. It kind of becomes a trope in even when we go into Return of the Living Dead that constantly there are people losing their shit in the panic of everything that happens. These characters, they got it down pat.
That's what you want to see. There's going to have hyper hysterical characters, and then people that just like, I'm in this situation, like with it, and of course you always want to be that guy.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so you're drawn to him just visually and engage with him probably most while he's on screen.
Exactly. It's very much the rule of cool. It's what we would all hope to be and have our shit together.
Right.
There, once we get in the mall, there is such genuine excitement on film. It was almost an anomaly to watch because these aren't played as comedic. These aren't played as, I don't know, the brevity or the lightness of the situation doesn't detract from the horror of them being trapped in the mall with a lot of zombies. It creates such excitement when they realize they can run around the zombies and outrun them.
Oh.
When the characters are now planning, how do we lock down and secure an entire mall? How do we kill all the zombies in the mall? It was the music is happy. The music is light and jovial, I can't tell you,
but it fit.
Yes, exactly. It worked so well. It should have been the entire film. That first 30 minutes should have been just them in the mall in some way. And it works in a way that obviously later on, zombies being a naturally goofy concept, you see slowly comedy being paired with horror. And
it's dangerous. It can be dangerous.
Absolutely.
It's dangerous territory.
Absolutely. And I think more often than not, that's probably a miss. And we'll talk a little bit about the legacies of these films going forward.
Yeah.
But man, there is as an audience member, you have the same excitement of, wow, we just found a gun store in this mall, as the characters on screen to say, wow, like this is amazing. Going shopping, there's a real genuine excitement to those scenes, and it was amazing to watch for that reason because it's not played off as a comedy. It's not played off to detract from the horror. It's just almost like a Christmas scene, and there's a natural excitement on film for that reason.
That's so interesting. And like you said, we're so used to seeing so much comedy interwoven in our zombie movies now. And you have Zombieland and things like that. But it's really, it's almost like in the roots. It really comes, it's interesting.
Exactly. There's maybe it relates to the freedom of it. Society is collapsing. There's a freedom
there
to,
is.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, and obviously I want to keep this very, or as spoiler-free as possible with the film. But it is something to watch because it's done in such a good way, and I can't, again, it does not detract or distract from what is the real horror of they got a lot of zombies they're dealing with on their hands.
Right.
It's a small squad, it's a small head count. So it's just great. I think more than anything, why I want to focus on it so much, because it's a huge highlight for this film of keeping a brisk and fun feeling to an otherwise really downer film. As any zombie film would be.
Right.
But it shows as a trope, again, for the evolution of what this kind of watch list is about, that comedy naturally exists in zombies. Zombies are goofy. You can run right past them. They're dumb.
Right.
They're not strategic creatures.
Right,
Right.
It's true, yeah.
So it was good to see because again, if this is about focusing on what is the progression, what is the tropes of what a zombie is, zombie DNA, once again, comedy is now being interwoven and evolving on this second
almost
iteration.
important.
Yes,
yes,
absolutely important to the digestibleness of a film.
Yeah.
You know, how enjoyable is it really to watch? So, yeah, for that reason, Dawn is definitely a little bit sillier, and I think definitely starts to really lean more into man being the true threat, whether that's the panic within a group, whether that is outsider interaction with the plot. I think it's probably for worse, because that's where I saw that trope and I said, oh, well, I know where this is going. For me, I think it falls into a little bit more area of predictability. I know that's kind of tough to say because, of course, we're watching earlier films. We're going back. You know, we're intentionally trying to spot where these trends start. I think for me, that's where the film really grows weak. It hits such a magic moment in them trying to problem solve and survive effectively within a mall, and it's such a delight to watch them on screen build a plan of action.
Yeah.
It's almost a similar way of how a heist movie scratches that itch in your mind. But when it comes down to a little bit of where that plot or that plan unravels in a bad way, and where the zombies are repeatedly introduced to be a force you cannot survive around, that's where I think the film grows a little bit weaker for me. It's still very enjoyable, but I think anyone watching that, after a moment,
it's going to feel that.
Yeah. You're really going to feel that, and I think that's even regardless of whether you are a avid zombie watcher or not. Overall, I think this film has a little bit too much fat on it too. A lot is focused on the individual relationships of our main squad. I think some of it is brought home in a good way. Others is just kind of left there, and it made me wonder: is this just the message that the plot has and the movie has, that, you know, no matter how special you think you are, you're not above potentially being in in the horde, one of the many horde? I think that's probably a factor there in the message that Romero is trying to get across in this movie, much like it would be the analogy of the living dead being in a mall and kind of mindless consumers. But I think it comes off a little bit too much. Again, what I have it marked down as is a little bit just too much fat.
Okay.
Could be trimmed a little bit.
It makes sense. It is 2 hours and 7 minutes for
Exactly.
a zombie movie, yeah.
And I think that plays
There's
right
almost like-
into that opening as
Yeah,
well.
cut out 30 minutes, and you're right there. You're right there.
Put me in the mall. It's great.
Yeah.
It's, oh man. It really, that those sections of the movie are magic. There's just such a genuine excitement to it. But I think it's a landmark film. Very simply, if I had to put credence in Night of the Living Dead versus Dawn of the Dead, it's going to be tough to say which one is more integral, because I think Night of the Living Dead really drives home the DNA of the zombie, but not scary zombies, where Dawn of the Dead has scary zombies, but maybe loses some of that simplicity that drives home what a zombie film is about.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I love that it's the same director, and I love that he's building on things, and thank God it was almost him that brought this genre to us.
I know.
Who knows what the zombie genre could have been had we had other directors?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Wow, very interesting.
Yeah. I think, where it's golden, zombies plus mall, I think just very simply he was, Romero was probably just walking through a mall and be like, it'd be good to hold up there, and which is great. That's really an electric plot, but that's where it kind of comes aside. One last note, real quick, before we get into the ratings, is this film is in licensing hell. You cannot find this on any streaming service. You will find the 2004 Zack Snyder Dawn of the Dead,
it's everywhere.
which is everywhere, and almost makes you think, is that the definitive way to watch the movie? I would definitely say no. We're not touching on that movie in this special for a couple of reasons, but it is extremely hard to try to find this film and watch it. I want to almost bump it in a rating because of that, because I don't like licensing problems preventing us from watching a film, especially something so much of a landmark as this.
Right.
It's something to note, because if this is going to be a practical watching guide and you take this, you listen to this episode at home, folks, and you want to do the same kind of deep dive into these films and enjoy it on that level,
be prepared.
Be prepared. It's going to be pulling teeth. Probably that's a YouTube watch. Maybe that's an illegal watch, or
hard copy.
Sure. Hard copy as well. Very hard to find.
Very strange.
It's tough. We'll go into some of the licensing, but I felt that was important to note because, man, that nothing sucks more than, especially with increasingly digital media, the option to watch something this much of a landmark taken away from a viewing audience. So, but with that said, Dawn of the Dead, Mall of the Dead, we are going to go ahead and give that a 79.
Oh, a 79. Well, I thought it was going to crack the 80s. Definitely the way you were talking about it.
I thought so for a while,
so
too.
Just one notch above.
Exactly.
One notch above Night of the Living Dead.
And if anything, I do you hit the nail on the head. I do want to relay that both of those are almost just as integral to the zombie watching experience. But because that point difference is so so negligible, it's almost pick your poison. Pick what you want to dive into.
I think both. I think I would pair both together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. At the end of the day.
Yeah.
But it's just 79, still very, very good. Especially when you're dealing with a zombie movie, that it's so close to this is almost all time stuff that you should be watching.
Right.
Very cool. Yeah, that's awesome. But okay, so let's just keep it going here. So our third film on the list here, The Return of the Living Dead.
Yes.
By Dan O'Bannon.
So basically what happens in a little bit about this, and why I was so excited to talk about this, folks, is because in researching zombie films in general, not only are there a shotgun blast of zombie films of varying quality, most bad, that you would have to research and dive into, there is a very confusing split of the main Romero line of what these zombie films and what zombie sequels there are to the main line of Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, because you have Night of the Living Dead. This is the return of the Living Dead.
Exactly.
And Romero's nowhere to be found on this.
Exactly. So what we have is Night of the Living Dead, co-written by John Russo and directed by George A. Romero. Dawn of the Dead, to my knowledge, John Russo isn't coming back at all for that interaction. That is all 100%.
All Romero and Romero writing as well.
Exactly.
Yep.
Jump forward to 85.
9 years later after Dawn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
George A. Romero is making Day of the Dead, the next sequel. And if you really like Dawn of the Dead, I think just a quick tidbit for Day of the Dead, it's worth your time. But I didn't want to focus on it because mainly for the scope of what this watch list is about, it doesn't really do anything with the evolution of the zombies. It's more of what works and what doesn't work.
Romero hit his limit. He should have just stopped after the first two films and not go on to his third.
Exactly. And for the study of evolution in zombies, I think that was important to shine a light on the other main film series, is the Return of the Living Dead film series. John Russo, the very same year as Day of the Dead, is making his own film. And now through legal battles,
So bad blood between these two.
I believe so. Initially, there was a lot of bad blood. I believe actually Romero consulted on Return of the Living Dead, and then it got a little messy. Overall, what this results is the licensing hell that Dawn of the Dead is in.
Okay.
And as well, a very confusing way to approach this series, because by all intents and purposes, if you started with Night of the Living Dead and then went to Return of the Living Dead, you would have whiplash, because Return of the Living Dead is a straight-up comedy.
Wow.
Total opposite end.
Jeez, was it so... Yeah.
And a nightmare to try to navigate.
Yeah. Because have you told me, like, Tom, I want you to make a zombie list or essential zombie movies, or give me a list so we can see progression of zombie movies. I would have to go and watch 80 movies,
right,
and then try to work my way through this and like trying to get through the things. It's like, that's confusing, especially for a start of a genre.
It's in the same year.
It's too much homework.
Oh my god, it's a lot to focus on. Return of the Living Dead goes on to have, I believe, 3 or 4 sequels as well, and much like the Of the Dead series, that dips more and more in quality, unfortunately.
Okay.
Return of the Living Dead almost catastrophically drops in quality by the second one. But I think it is my slot for this 85 year because out of the two, Day of the Dead, it's more of what we're expecting from Romero. Return of the Living Dead is pretty shocking as far as the comedy and what directions they go with.
Okay, yeah.
And especially for the evolution of the zombies. Basically, what this movie is about is a fourth wall breaking type of environment where Night of the Living Dead, the movie itself, is in the universe and a true story to the characters.
Okay.
The intro is really great for that reason because it breaks the fourth wall in the best way, that it's taking and almost really intentionally shining a spotlight on the goofiness of zombies, maybe some of the goofiness of Night of the Living Dead, and having the characters talk about it like audiences would talk about it. The film uses that as a premise for constantly subverting expectations of what zombies truly are, and more kind of improvising on, we really don't know the threat, and that's where all the comedy in this film rises from.
So, I mean, honestly, it sounds like it could be an absolute nightmare. Seriously, it sounds like that doesn't sound necessarily appealing, and to make it good sounds really difficult.
Yeah. This film, I think, is important to watch for how comedy in zombie films can play into it. When it comes to the actual quality of this film is extremely 80s, from one of the most wild soundtracks. It's that cranked up to 11. The characters themselves are a motley crew of almost every 80s archetype, from punk to mod to Valley Girl. It's a combination of a lot of factors. It's almost odd how much of a time capsule it is, because it's like in 85, were these dress styles really that ingrained? I don't know. I mean, it felt weird almost, but it is a straight comedy because it plays a lot of the sequences just with, it takes that panic of the need for survival and takes it and puts it with people that have no right surviving because they're just bumbling buffoons.
We lose our competent characters.
Exactly. I think in that it fails as a horror, in that it fails a tiny bit as our zombie DNA, but I still think it's important to watch because the evolution of the zombies, it shows that it takes that factor of zombies naturally being goofy and amps it up, and it also kind of, in this fourth wall breaking way of the Night of the Living Dead being canonical in their own universe, it takes that factor and say, do we really know what zombies are about? It almost questions it in an artistic way of zombies can be anything. And that's what is improvised on in the film for comedic beats and probably failed horror beats as well.
Yeah, sure. But it's very interesting how here we are later from kind of that original, what we think of movies. And this is important. The reason why we have so many of those other zombie movies, and maybe you could say bad zombie movies, but this is the start of those, maybe.
Yeah.
Not that this is bad, but just the goofiness of it, nonstop.
Yeah.
Or full stop, I should say.
The goofiness is there. And again, bottom line, if I had to really break it down to an exact formula, it's the zombie scares are not used for anything but subverting expectations of what zombies are about. And what that comes into play is a very goofy zombie. The result is a very goofy zombie.
And that's what I'm saying with this film. After this, it opens up the box for anybody who wants to do zombie movies. Just like, oh, well, this is giving us the ability to, let's do whatever we want with our zombies in our film. Who cares about the structure of the Romero? Apparently we can do whatever we want now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Russo definitely takes that into the whole Return of the Living Dead series. I believe, again, up to 3 or 4 films, maybe even more. But they're all pretty much comedies for that reason.
And still all writing, or did he get behind the director's chair in some of them?
I think it's actually
this is Dan O'Brien.
Exactly.
Or Dan O'Bannon.
I think it's all his stories that are being adapted.
Okay.
But again, I'm not going to focus on it too much because much like Of the Dead, the Living Dead series, it kind of goes down more and more. Becomes more derivative. definitely there's better spotlights as we progress through the decades. Let's talk about the zombie DNA. Of course, we have them evolving. The love of brains comes into play here. More is done with the zombies being a little bit more sentient. They're not without speaking. They do kind of have a sense of what they're doing. There's almost like, actually, some of probably the better comedic moments are when, again, these expectations of, oh, they're fine to walk through that zombies, and then there's something that, they're actually planning against the humans, and they're actually very strategic. A lot of those comedic
You're getting
moments,
more competence out of the zombies now. Where
exactly.
you're losing competence in the characters.
Yeah.
You're gaining competency with the zombies.
And if that's going to be the comedic punchline of almost every joke of the film, I think it does work to a certain extent. I think, unfortunately, though, you have to choose that very careful balancing act of horror and comedy.
It's done so often, but it's not done right often.
Exactly.
And it's just difficult to do.
Exactly. I think watching these films, and especially going into Shaun of the Dead, which I love to death, it's such a delicate balancing act because when it sours, it really strips you out of the movie.
Well, it's because they're on polar opposites.
Yeah, exactly.
True horror and true comedy are in such opposites.
Yep.
It's almost like, I wonder why these are paired together so often.
Yeah, it's emotionally heavy on one side and then the light, breezy side.
Yeah.
And kind of leaves you in the mix there. So VFX are very impressive in this one.
Wow.
That's also another reason I wanted to touch upon that, where the Day of the Dead and the Of the Dead series goes into gross. The VFX for Return to the Living Dead, especially for this first one, they're very impressive because we're pushing once again what zombies are about. There are some zombie cadavers. There are some goo radiation type of zombies, which are really fun to watch on screen because they look absolutely ridiculous. But once again, it's improving and improvisation on the idea of the zombie. I think it's done very well, if only because for this first one, Russo is coming back to the plate and he has all these fresh ideas after how many years since 68.
Yep.
So that practical effects was really fun to see. Overall, funny at times for its wildness. Again, that motley crew of characters that you have, from punks to mall rats. There's some good moments, and it's good mostly because of just how wild this film is. This film strikes a counterculture type of feel, much like a Rocky Horror Picture Show would.
Okay.
Even in it's kind of hard to explain, but even in the credits, how they run the credits, it felt like that type of movie.
Okay.
Replaying gags and replaying jokes in the credits. It feels like very much of that counterculture early 80s. Intentionally a little raunchier, intentionally a little grosser, and that's for that reason. But for that, it's a little bit of an unfunny film. I understand that's subjective. We'll obviously return to comedy with Shaun of the Dead and how that I feel that lands more successfully. But I think why this is on this special is looking at the VFX, looking at the evolution of zombies, and spotlighting what someone did in the same year to improvise on zombies rather than fall in the pitfall of same old, same old.
Sure.
With that said, Return of the Living Dead, we're going to go ahead and give a 68.
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
That sounds about right. 68 is still a pretty good score, though. Especially with what you're dealing with. It's like, that's impressive because it's just, you could mess it up so mad. When you're going for so much comedy, it's so easy to just have a horrible, horrible zombie movie on your hand.
Exactly.
Which just sounds like what we get because they stick with the genre,
Yeah. And there's some enjoyable moments to the historical viewing of this because you realize that this was a split in creators of the OG.
Yeah.
This is the genuine article here, and now they're improvising it in two very different ways. And also, if you're going to give credit to it, it's probably the only good movie in that entire series. So, it gets a little bit of a courtesy spot.
Yeah, no, for sure. 68 is still a good score. Okay, so before we move on to our last two here, we'll just take a quick break. We don't do producer segments for our specials, but we just want to take a quick moment, let people know we're basing ourselves on the value for value model. So we're not taking sponsorships or anything like that. It's purely donation driven from you all who are the producers. Vin and I host this. You guys help produce it. And you can go to the donations tab on thedailyratings.com. You can do fun subscriptions. You can do whatever amount you want. It's just fun. We're building something here. We always appreciate you guys helping us produce. This takes a lot of time, a little bit of money. So to all you producers out there, we thank you so much. And all you future producers, again, we love you, and we just appreciate it very, very much. So we just want to give that quick shout out. And let's keep on moving on here. We take a big gap. You have 68, then you have 78, and then 85 with Return of the Living Dead. Nothing in the late 80s, nothing in the 90s. And on your list here, we have 2002, 28 Days Later.
Yeah.
Danny Boyle.
And the Brits taking a stab at this genre because obviously Danny Boyle and then Edgar Wright for Shaun of the Dead. It's not that, and some of the behind the scenes for this, folks, there was an idea of maybe zombie films through the decades. One, the 90s doesn't have any kind of good movie.
Which is crazy. No trend. Yeah, nothing that sets a new trend.
Yeah.
Nothing that it's all, would you just say all of the same?
All the same, and a lot of the main spotlight is put on the Of the Dead and Living Dead sequels coming out.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I'm a strong believer that nothing is really done creatively with the DNA of what the zombies are about, the tropes, the trends. When we get to 28 Days Later, I think this is finally a movie that I would say has the concept of zombies being used creatively, but plainly wants to be a movie about our characters, a character drama, an apocalyptic feel more than anything else. Where in previous moments, especially for maybe Dawn of the Dead, which is champ so far, we have still it being focused on a magnifying glass of a single location for the first time, I think, with 28 Days Later. Maybe not the first time, but I would say probably the best time. We have an introduction that this is an infection. This is potentially global. The misinformation that happens with, is this beyond the UK? Is this something that we can survive from? Obviously, the concept of 28 Days Later is played out in how quickly things have gone to shit.
Right.
And how truly dire our characters are in such a short amount of time. It has a gravity to it that I think propels this film from not only being a good zombie film, but a great movie overall.
Very cool.
That infection theme is played right into the survival elements, which I think are great. We take the mall concept that we see in Dawn, and now we blow that out to a city-scale landscape. This is in two ways. One, the isolation and the horror of this you can definitely see as a trendsetter for later films like I Am Legend and other type of apocalyptic films, that it's captivating to watch a dead city on screen.
Big time.
And maybe one or a few characters wandering through that. So I think visually really impressive to see and have that struck home. At the same time, what we have is that same concept of freedom, of there is a liberation in society falling down and, the survivors being able to do what they want to do. That is now, once again, blown up to an entire city size.
Yeah, a massive scale now. Yeah.
Absolutely. A lot of the cinematography is quiet. A lot of it is reflective, especially for what our characters kind of go through emotionally. I think emotionally, the beats are hiked up quite a bit, because while we have moments of brevity, it really is much more drama of the true horror of what happens and almost the unfortunate mishappenings that happen in a stressful event.
Yeah, and not much comedy here, correct? Because this is not a funny situation to be in at all.
This
is taking you in with the character and sinking you into just the absolute raw emotion and feeling that you're in. Which is an empty, horrible situation.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a little bit of brevity that happens sometimes, almost very similarly how there's genuine excitement to finding new places in the mall. There's genuine excitement in discovering parts of the city that they can benefit from as survivors.
Yeah.
So there is brevity there. If I had to mark this film on something, it is stakes versus characters. Unfortunately, again, we don't have the smartest characters here. There are some moments where you're taken out of it, and it may be the scenes are put there to have a similar type of brevity to that discovery freedom element that we're driving into, but man, I think it's for the worse because it takes you out of it.
So what you're saying when you're watching these characters, it's like that. Come on, a real person would not be doing that. That is not.
Yeah.
It's funny. You set up you're in a zombie world, which is totally just like ridiculous and not real. But once when we all agreed to be watching this movie, and it's like, oh, okay, the stage is set. This is what we're in. Picturing ourselves in this world that was made for us. That's when you're like, this wouldn't be happening right now, and that's when it's taken. So it's weird to say that's not realistic because the whole movie
Right.
isn't realistic.
Right,
But
the
at the
old
same
movies.
time, if this is what the stage is,
Yep.
this is ridiculous.
Absolutely. And I think the movie shoots itself in the foot because the first half of it is the stakes are so high. You do not travel alone. These zombies are vicious, you know.
Sure.
And I think that's probably a good bridge into let's talk about the zombie DNA in this one. This slot for me represents the rage zombie, the running zombie, the maybe pack mentality zombie, that it's not necessarily just a mindless horde, that there's a hunting to it. I think we see this, again, be a trendsetter for things like I Am Legend. Obviously, going into later in the decade and then into the 2010s, we see something like this blown out to a large proportion, maybe like a World War Z, where there's almost a fetish of large zombies, and that now evolves it again. I think the DNA is right here in 28 Days Later, and unfortunately, those movies don't do much more for it to beat it out.
This is the first time, this is like, 30-ish, 35 years later from that first one of slow, not really scary zombies to pretty scary zombies, but still slow and dumb. And then here we are. It's like, no, it's upping the zombies once again, but in a tasteful way.
Absolutely.
Which is why I'm glad you put this on this list, I think, because it's another milestone in the zombie culture.
Absolutely. And I think as maybe not as effective or as kind of like blockbustery a lot of zombie headcount is, a higher zombie headcount on the screen, it's still important to recognize that is a trend in how zombies have evolved in film and how we're seeing them as a threat. I think it's done no better except right here in 28 Days Later.
Right.
Once again, though, I think it drives home what a zombie film is about. I for a second, I kind of balanced, they're rage zombies. It's not really the living dead, per se. It's more of a viral infection to this film. But it is a zombie film in the DNA of survival, information dumps from public sources and using that as a tension builder. Man being the true threat, it hits 100%.
And man being taking on a new creature form, life form kind of. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And the problem solving, most importantly. I think if I had to nail of all those tropes and all those trends that we've been talking about and how they built, it is a zombie film. If I had to boil it down to one point, it is problem solving. And I think where some movies really fail with that is that you like seeing effective problem solving on screen. You don't like getting frustrated. And maybe some of the horror comes from there and tension, but
frustration could be good as far as like, oh, you don't want to do that, don't do that.
Right.
But you still want to deal with competent characters.
Exactly.
It puts you in the room and you can be competent with the character and have those disagreements and agreements. You don't want to be saying, you're an idiot. This is just not what would be happening right now.
Right.
It's a big difference there.
And if anything, and we're obviously going to be talking in our last slot about Shaun of the Dead, a horror comedy, if you're going to do it, you got to make it about it 100%. You can't do... The balancing act is committing, I think, to one side. It's actually probably not a balancing act at all. But yeah, overall, I think where this movie stands above is, again, like I said a little bit ago, it transcends what a zombie movie can be, evolves and improvises on that a little bit, but mostly it's one of the best acted zombie movies.
Yeah, you have a pretty young Cillian Murphy in there, correct?
Yes. You have a lot of young actors in there.
Naomi Harris is in it, which is great. That's very cool.
Exactly. Oh wait, that's Moneypenny, right?
Yeah,
she's so good in it too. She's so great. Plays a very cool character. But yeah, I think overall, just the performances themselves, it's just a caliber above. And I think that's where
it's almost such a shame. It adds insult to injury that the writing for these characters was maybe not top notch when it came to the you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Because if you have the actors, the talent was there.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, especially because the stakes for these characters are so high. Yeah. We're all the more invested emotionally. The true drama comes from the emotional stress of the horde, the zombie is not your loved one. It is a zombie now, you know?
Yeah.
So I think because the stakes are so incredibly high with that, if anything, it spotlights the little moments that you could probably say, oh, that was just a little bit moment, but it's like a massive spotlight on it because it's magnified.
Sure, absolutely.
But I think for the most part, 28 Days Later, this is where this lands in a must-watch because it has the excitement naturally occurring from Dawn. It has the roots of everything what a zombie film is about. We finally mix in probably not an award-winning performance, but a critical performance in our actors.
Yeah. And you have Danny Boyle at the helm.
Exactly.
Which is, big time.
Exactly. I hate to toss it up to the Brits do it better, but in these two cases, they really knocked it out of the park. And Danny Boyle's DNA is absolutely in the film editing of this film, and it really is a great film, and I think is the first zombie film we finally have in a must-watch. With that said, we will go ahead and give 28 Days Later an 80.
80 on the dot. Very
80
good.
on the dot.
I think that's extremely fair, and I think that makes sense as well. And I think a lot of our listeners know at least the respect that 28 Days Later has. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's more closer to our, we're not in the 60s or 70s anymore. You know what I mean? It's bringing it into we all know about it, even if you haven't even watched it. Everyone knows kind of that 28 Days Later has an importance, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
But an
it has
80,
a solitude to
I
it.
love that you cracked it over that mark. Then I mean, it's very impressive that we have 78, 79, 80. I love that.
And folks at home, you may say, oh, it's a couple points. What's the big deal with this? I think it's illustrative that all these films are worth your time in different ways. It's just again, it's different interpretations.
They're all worth their own salt,
exactly,
but in different ways, and that makes sense because what we're doing here is kind of showing progression of zombie movies.
Exactly.
Where does the culture change in those pivotal movies, and we're kind of hitting all those. So speaking of which, let's keep it going. So again, we keep on pointing out the years here. 28 Days Later, 2002. It's only 2 years later that we get our next film and final film on the list, which is Edgar Wright doing Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, and I think there's, like I said, there's definitely evolution to the zombie DNA in future years, but this is where I feel this movie takes what the zombie DNA is, what zombies are about, and uses it instead of where Return of the Living Dead was a subversion of those expectations for comedy.
Right.
This is using what the audience knows as what a zombie entails and what a zombie story entails, and uses that as strategic ammunition for the comedic beats. And much like all of Edgar Wright's stuff, it is done to a exceedingly high level of care and planning and design. This movie is interwoven so naturally from the jokes and the repetition of what some one-liners are and how it's tied into to the visual comedy of the editing. It's really done no better at this level.
And that's really interesting. So you would almost place it where, you just made a comment with 28 Days Later where you said, if you're going to have comedy, basically go for it. But in Dawn of the Dead, you said, it's sprinkled in. And then you have the Return of the Living Dead, which it goes for full-on comedy, but in a totally different way.
Yes.
Not that, obviously, John Rousseau didn't have care and consideration, but this is, we're decades later. It has a whole new meaning now.
Exactly.
And this is really kicking it off well.
And if I really had to distinguish where Return of the Living Dead fails and where Shaun of the Dead succeeds, is that Return of the Living Dead has a goofy feel because the zombies are all about subverting expectation and saying, hey, actually, you don't know what zombies are about. Zombies talk. Right. Zombies are about brains, where this is, the zombies are very straight, and that is just a beautiful platform for all comedy and all jokes to be built upon.
Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah.
That is our backbone to say, oh, yeah, I know what's going to happen, and then the jokes are about subverting the outcome, not necessarily the horror itself.
Right. Okay.
So, playing that straight, I think it just sets up that comedic expectation so much better than Return of the Living Dead. Honestly, I would 100% consider this a movie that follows through on what we've been talking about the whole time. What are the info dumps on TV? What are the survival elements? What is unpacking and understanding the monster for what it to be?
Yeah.
We don't have so much of a point that there is a that characters know what necessarily zombies are in the film. They do call them zombies, but it's all there to really unpack what all these movies are about, which is, again, and I mean, it's a special, and we're always talking about this, but it is problem solving. It is problem solving on screen. That problem solving is so well designed to have comedic punchlines and comedic payoffs for the whole thing. It just effortlessly makes a melding of zombies being naturally goofy, maybe kind of a threat, maybe also not too much of a threat.
Interesting.
And combines them with characters that probably have no right surviving to it, but it's because they're such, it's kind of low forces meeting low forces. It hits home so well.
It's comedy and just the ridiculousness of it all.
Exactly.
Now, I have a question with the characters, though. If you're getting kind of bottom barrel as far, it sounds like you have not very highly competent people, but very much on purpose, and it's a main attraction of these characters.
Absolutely.
Is that like, no, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Is the non-competent part.
The big theme here as well that I think, again, what will separate any kind of comedy that Edgar Wright does is that it really does have a story and a message to tell behind the jokes. The concept here is dead weight. He has Shaun has a friend that is dead weight with him, and he's surrounded by dead people. I mean, there's deeper there. There's care put into the writing, and I mean, I will probably bring this up with every Edgar Wright film that I dive into. That care is shown in the visual design of the editing. For this case, it is all visual comedy. Whether it is a scene of him walking up a toy slide to see a horde of the dead and then walking down. The visual comedy, I mean, it's very British. This is a very British film, so maybe there's a slight disclaimer for folks at home that you may need subtitles sometimes, but it hits so much because that editing transcends maybe a cultural joke.
Right.
Or something that's hokey to British people, and that'll make a laugh in those type of audiences. I think where that bridges it and where this becomes a much higher graded film for me is that editing, it transcends cultural boundaries,
Sure, absolutely.
I almost wish Edgar Wright or a director like that in Japanese comedy would come about to bridge some of those comedic moments a little bit better.
For a wider audience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Have it land for a wider audience. It's not just because to see, more people enjoy it or more money at the box office. I think you achieve a better film, a more well-rounded film.
Yes, a more complete, yep.
Absolutely. But that visual editing, that visual comedy, I think when talking about Edgar Wright, it almost all roads lead back to Shaun of the Dead because I think this is where it really hits. Personally, I am a fan of some of the later films, and hopefully in future specials I can interweave as much Edgar Wright content as possible. But I think, it is just so entertaining to watch moving pictures on the screen with his movies. And I mean, that's the simplest way I can put it, if anything, intentionally oversimple to really illustrate that there is a reason why this is a motion picture versus a novel versus a video, versus any other art form,
It's crucial, and it's in the DNA of this film in particular.
Exactly.
Those visuals, yeah.
Exactly. So I think in that comparison of what is right with Return of the Living Dead and Shaun of the Dead, it's just genuinely better writing. And I think comedy writing, that can probably be subjective. I think if I had to distinguish this for folks at home, and especially for anyone that has seen Shaun of the Dead and maybe even Return of the Dead as well, or Return of the Living Dead, it's just the jokes are interweaved so much better. It's payoff, it's tie back, it's everything that you would mark a great stand-up set for, of tying back into themes and calling back to jokes to create zingers and whatnot. This film does that effortlessly, and if I really had to, because you can say, well, they're both comedies, or how does one succeed and the other fail? I think, again, it's just very simply, it's more thoughtfulness in that writing, better design.
There's something more going on here. Yep.
And there's always something going on in the visual comedy of it, again, just to tie back into the editing. If the jokes aren't landing for you, if you maybe can't understand this character because of a very heavy, heavy UK accent, it is, bottom line, Edgar hedges the bet with the visual comedy of what's going on screen. The zombie DNA, it is here in almost to a T of what we've been studying so far, but that is why this lands on the list, because it is now not trying to improvise and instead use that as a baseline, and I would say almost masterfully use it as a baseline for all punchlines of the film, and kind of understands what it is. If, again, what we were just talking about, if you're going to mix comedy and horror, it's got to understand what it's doing and what it's designed for. Though there are emotional beats in Shaun of the Dead, you have to go in and say, this is always for the punchline. This is always for the comedy. And for that sense, it's almost 100% comedy, even though it has very horrific themes.
Yeah.
But with that said, I think that is going to wrap up what we've talked about for Shaun of the Dead. We will go ahead and give Shaun of the Dead an 83.
Wow. Okay. Not expecting that at all.
I think
very good.
It is well designed, and I am comfortable, at least as of this moment, as of recording, saying it is my favorite zombie film.
Wow, that's fantastic. And to have it such comedy heavy.
Right.
Compared, because, it's funny that the comedy zombie films are your highest and lowest. Because we have a 68 and an 83.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought that's why I was kind of thinking, maybe he's going to go low 70s here. Definitely better than Living of the Dead. But that just goes to show how masterful kind of Edgar Wright can be at that balancing. And just hitting those marks he needs to be for what the film is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's really cool. And
it encapsulates everything. Bottom line, it's everything a zombie film should be. And that's why a lot of these are so similar in ranking. There's probably a 5 to 6 point difference between them all.
Yeah.
It's about what are you doing with the DNA, what are you doing with the tropes, and what a zombie is, and what a zombie film should be about. Preparation, survival, some excitement to the collapse of civilization. There are naturally goofy elements, and I think Shaun of the Dead understands what it is through and through.
That's great. Very, very good homework that you had to do, and this was a great guide. And just honestly, because it's something that I'm not too well aware of. Sure. I haven't seen all of these, and I'm a little embarrassed to say. But definitely a great guide, or just like bringing us through the decades of the zombie. I think that's fascinating. Great work, and these really good movies here.
Yeah,
it's quite a good list.
And hopefully navigate through, honestly,
so
as
much
you
garbage out there.
Exactly. And as you dive deeper, there's even more confusion, Let's say just simply as an audience member, you say, I'm going to do all the Living Deads. Well, you go from a 68 movie to a full comedy and 4 comedies, and that's not good, you know what I mean?
And then the aftermath of that, it's just horrible, just bad.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. And I love finding out about George A. Romero, how he was kind of the father, the grandfather of what we know today of zombies.
Absolutely.
And you have to thank the Walking Dead. You have to thank for that.
No, for sure.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there. He created the genre, basically.
And something so unique to film itself. That's where I got a lot of excitement of diving into this, because like I said in the beginning, vampires, Swamp Thing, aliens, these are all born in books to some extent, There's obviously movie adaptations of that in the 50s monster kind of creature features. Zombies, they're born on screen. And I think that was wonderful to have as kind of a deep dive into for the ratings.
It was fun, too. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And it's such a great list to have, and we can't, we'll have it as a compilation on the site for sure for people. I think it's just so much fun, and not just you put a lot of thought and care into it, big time. So
for zombies,
we appreciate
for something brainless.
All right, Vin, is there anything else you would like to add to this special, or should we roll credits here?
I think it's the only thing I would add, and tying into producers, much how I came across this topic and was overwhelmed very quickly with what is heads or tails on good movies. If you come across that, practically speaking, folks at home, of you're diving into something and it is a nightmare to try to navigate, I think that is exactly where we want to hear from you.
Yeah, let us know. Exactly. Email us. Donate, and we'll read your note on the show and everything like that, and we can have an open dialogue about it. Appreciate you stopping by, Vin. This took a lot of time for Vin to put together. We released these specials separately from our normal episodes, so it's even more film watching during all this time. It's a lot of movies per week that Vin's taking time and watching, studying, note-taking. We're putting all this extra time into, a whole nother podcast and putting them on the site and creating these things about it. It is fun for us, but it is time-consuming, and there's a lot of thought and care put into what we do. So if you do enjoy this, if you didn't even think you were a zombie fan or going to check some of this out, not even a horror fan, but you found this valuable, we would really appreciate some support. And if you found value, then could you give us back some value? We appreciate it. We're having a lot of fun with this. We hope you are too. And we can't wait to work with you guys and build up a little family, and we're all having a good time together.
Absolutely.
It's wonderful. So we'll just run down these one more time, folks. We have Night of the Living Dead with a 78%, Dawn of the Dead, the 1978 version, with 79%, The Return of the Living Dead with a 68%, 28 Days Later, breaking that 80 mark with a straight 80%, and Shaun of the Dead with an 83%. We thank you so much, folks, for stopping by for this special, and we will see you next time on the Daily Ratings Podcast. If you enjoyed the special, if you would, give us a good rating or tell a friend about us. If you're wondering if a film is worth a watch or just like to see more movie ratings from Vince, be sure to stop by thedailyratings.com, where we have our ever-expanding catalog of films. Also, if you found value in the podcast or our site, become a producer and go to the donations tab on thedailyratings.com. You can donate whatever amount of value you feel you received from us. You'll get a producer mention on the next podcast episode too. So we're looking to build this into something large and great, but be independent from those corporate sponsors. So we greatly appreciate any support from you all. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time on the Daily Ratings Podcast.